How many of us were counted among those who were required to take a COVID test back during the corona apocalypse when you got that wonderful stick that you were supposed to ram up your nose and poke the backside of your brain, and then after a conniption, you would find out a few minutes later whether or not you were sick or whether or not you were well enough to return to work, return to the space outside of your own home. How many of you had one of those snot sticks poked up into your noggin? See, you can tell because the eyes just don't quite look right anymore. We kind of see crooked. Oh boy, that was torture, wasn't it? I hated those things. These sort of tests to evaluate whether we are healthy or not aren't limited just to COVID. In fact, you can even read about some of them in the Bible. And I want to describe one of them to you yet this morning. In Leviticus 13 and 14, they weren't considering COVID in these tests. They were more concerned about another illness, a really highly contagious skin disease called leprosy. And so if you had leprosy, this skin disease that we can read about in the Old Testament and the New Testament, it was a really big deal because you could make other people sick. They were afraid of you. They would shun you. And in fact, you'd get kicked out of town. So if you had COVID and you got locked down, you'd be stuck at home with the Wi-Fi and Netflix. That really wasn't too bad, but come on, I got some things to do. But if you had leprosy, you weren't even allowed in your own living room. You had to leave town altogether. So you couldn't be with your family. You couldn't sleep in your own bed. You know what that's like. That's no fun. And if you were a Jew, to make it even worse, when you had leprosy and you got kicked out of town, you weren't allowed to come to the place of worship. So for Jews, what that meant was you were cut off not only from your family, not only from your job, but as Jews, you would have been cut off from God, cut off from your only access to salvation. To be diagnosed with leprosy was a really big deal. It had eternal consequences. So suddenly that snot stick doesn't quite sound so bad, does it, anymore? Not that I want us to be sick, but for those people who had leprosy, if they got better, keeping in mind there was no cure, they didn't have any effective treatment, but if they got better from their leprosy, then what they were instructed to do, and the Bible talks about this, like I mentioned in Leviticus 13 and 14, they were to call a priest to come to them because they couldn't go back into town, right? So they would ask the priest to come outside of town and check me out. I think I'm better from my leprosy. And if you were better, then there was this whole ritual that you had to go through in order to demonstrate that now you were well again. And the ritual took an entire week for them to get through. It included some really weird stuff like yarn and tree branches, and I think there was like a bird in there somewhere. I don't know. But all this ritual, and then you would wind up, if the priest said yes, if you were 2 thumbs up, then a fresh haircut, a fresh shave, and a new change of clothes, and you'd be good to go back returning to life a week later. This process really created a social stigma. It's one thing to be around somebody who's sick. Like when you're at a restaurant and you hear somebody cough, do you feel the way I do when you hear somebody cough? You're like, and you're like, oh man, don't get that on my plate. I hope that wasn't coming over my way. And so when they put up those barriers in between the tables at the restaurants, I'm like, good, thank you. I didn't want to breathe in all that stuff anyway. I don't even like touching the menu. Okay, you bring the menu to the table, and I'll look over at my wife Adrian's menu so I can see what's good, but I don't want to touch it because who knows how many times those things have been dropped on the floor or somebody was getting all yucky in it. And the same sort of feelings that we get about being around people who aren't well, and we're concerned, oh man, I don't want to get whatever it is that person has. That was the social stigma that kind of lasted all the way from Leviticus 13 and 14 throughout the Gospels that we're going to look at together today. So I'd ask you if you could turn to Luke 17. I want to show that to you. And we'll look at a paragraph together, Luke 17. It's going to start then in verse 11. So find that with me, Luke 17. And we'll look together at this chapter and this paragraph here. It says this: On his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. It would be bad enough to meet one. Now you got a whole gaggle of them, 10 of them come up to him. And they stood at a distance, keeping in mind they weren't allowed to be near people. In fact, they even had to warn if they realized somebody who wasn't sick was around. They have to shout like, hey, watch out, I'm sick, I've got leprosy, so you might want to stay back. So they're shouting from a distance. Verse 13, it says, and they called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Look at verse 14. Luke 17:14. When he saw them, he said, go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. That's a very Jewish way to say they were healed and permitted to come back into the place of worship again. Verse 15, one of them, look at this with me, I want you to hear this. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Verse 17, Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? And then he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. So before we kind of dig into that particular text right there, I want to make sure I'm very, very clear. Jesus did not have a problem with foreigners. When you read those lines in there about like, well, there's this foreigner, don't be confused by it into thinking he didn't like foreigners. We know he frequently spent time visiting lots of different nations and hanging out with the people that others would say, oh, no, that's the wrong crowd. You don't want to be with them. So it wasn't an issue of that he didn't like the foreigners. The issue here was he's pointing out the irony that any Jew would have noticed. The last person they would have expected to come and say thanks was the only one who came to say thanks. So that's why he mentioned the thing about the foreigners here. For the last, 6, 7-ish weeks, you and I have been talking about and practicing prayer. We've been exploring different things that Jesus prayed, different things that Jesus taught about prayer. And in fact, we've actually kind of been putting into action, living out what happens there, what we just read in verse 13, calling out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Sort of like those 10 lepers were doing. When we realize that we have a need in our lives, whether it's illness or something else, we've been asking, Lord, help with this. We're crying out to him. And so we've been practicing this already, but here we come upon this paragraph right here, and it makes me kind of wonder, has God answered you? Are the kind of things that you've been praying about over the last 6-ish weeks? Would you say like, oh yeah, I prayed for this, and then it happened? Or I prayed for this person, and then their situation changed. Has God, nod your heads for me. Yes? No? Maybe? Yeah, I see a lot of heads going here. So some of us are recognizing specific instances, even in the last month and a half, where God has been at work. And so I think it would be good for us to follow the example of that one Samaritan person who had leprosy, that one who came back. He saw God at work. He came back. He praised God in a loud voice, and he threw himself at Jesus' feet, thanking him. And I want to break down those lines right there from Luke 17, because I think for you and for me, whenever we are in a position that God is answering our prayers, or even if it's not an answer to prayer, God is just simply at work in your life, or in my life, there are specific things that we can do as we follow the example of that Samaritan. And I want to point those out to you here. The very first one in verse 15, it says that when one of them saw that he was healed, right at the beginning of that verse right there. So I think what this kind of starts with is that we need to see. We need to see God at work. If we're not paying attention to the things that God is doing in our lives, then there's not really a whole lot of thanksgiving that's going on. If I don't realize that something good has happened, I'm not prompted to be like, wow, that was great. But for him, he saw that he was healed. All 10 of them got healed, but this verse right here, verse 15, specifically says he saw it. We know they all were healed, but he was the one who saw that was healed. Usually this kind of starts for us with some of the basics. What are the things that we say thank you for a lot of times? Whether you're thinking about like the Thanksgiving holiday or just your regular thank you prayers, what are things that we say thank God for? Just go ahead and shout one out.
Our health.
Yeah, we're thankful for our health. What else? Family. Health, family. What else comes to mind? Job. These are the very same things that I wrote down. We could say we're thankful for our jobs. We're thankful for our church. We can say we're thankful for our employment, our health, our children, our spouses. And these are good things for us to be thankful for. We should. It is good for us to express thanks for those things. But I also kind of think that given that those things come up a lot, when we're saying thank you to God for anything in general, that kind of stuff comes up a lot. I wonder if we could go just a little bit deeper than that. I'm not saying it's bad to be thankful for your job or your health or your family or whatever. We should be. But what if we went a little bit deeper than that? That particular man, that leper, saw that he was healed. So my question then becomes, how can you and I see what God's doing in our lives? If I'm not paying attention to what God's doing in my life, if I'm not seeing that, I'm not thanking him for it. I didn't even see that it happened. So how can we see that? And I want to give you a few ideas about the way that that works. I have had, I think, 3 conversations just in the last few days with separate people about slowing down. You've noticed it, right? The way that life just kind of gets going crazy faster and faster and faster. I think we kind of talk about it a little bit more this time of year, because what do we say about once the holidays come? Once you get past trick or treat, what do we say about time? Before you know it, it's going to be next calendar year, because those holidays come, boom, 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 boom. We feel this, we recognize it, and I really think that there are times in your life and in mine where the reason I don't see what God is doing, and thereby the reason I don't express my thanks for what he's doing, is just because I'm going too fast. I'm so busy. How many of us would say, oh yeah, you know what, I have a hectic pace, my life is stressed, I don't have enough time. If you've used phrases like these, you know what I'm talking about. It's like when you're in the car and you look out the window, driving 70 miles an hour on the highway, and then things are just zipping by. And how do they look? They're kind of blurry, right? You only get a fraction of a second to look at it because they go by so fast. That's our lives. We're going so stinking fast. So whether you feel like your pace in life is fast or slow or somewhere in between, I know each of us could benefit from slowing down a little bit. Slowing down so that we can see what God is doing. And when we slow down and when we see some of the things that God is doing, part of the way that we could take a next step in that is a way that I don't necessarily like, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. Some of you will be like, that's a great idea. And some of you will be like, we need to fire the pastor. A daily gratitude journal. Yeah. And I'll look around and see like if somebody's like, yeah, or like, I'm not doing that. I fall into the I'm not doing that category. No, but like, okay, people do this, right? They keep a daily gratitude journal. Every day they write down something that they're thankful for. If that's not you, you and I are on the same page. Like, I don't really want to sit on a journal a whole lot. That's okay if that's not you, but maybe you might think of it instead a little bit more like a grocery list, okay? That's a slip of paper that's magnetized onto the fridge, and you're writing down the things that you need, but instead of milk and eggs and toaster strudels, then you could write down something I'm thankful for today. And then tomorrow I do it again, but I don't write down the same thing I wrote today. And the day after that I do it again, but I don't write down the things that I wrote, because no repeats. That's the rules, okay? Next thing you know, you've got yourself a daily gratitude journal, even if you're not the journaling type. And I find that when I am making this type of a practice in my life, especially this time of year, it helps me get a little bit deeper than just the, boy, am I thankful for my wife. Am I thankful for my wife? Yeah, you bet I am. But I also want to get, to include my thanks for my wife, and then to get deeper than that for other things that I'm thankful for too, other people, other circumstances, other things in my life. And you could do that too. So one of the ways that I like to do this, I actually started by accident with my friend Dylan. He and I will send video messages back and forth to each other as we communicate every day or two. And we started saying things that we were thankful for in every one of those videos. So he would send me a video message, and he would say, I'm thankful for this and this and this. And then when I would respond to him, because we're talking about all kinds of stuff, but somewhere in that video would be I'm thankful for these 3 things. And then my response back to him that, I'm thankful for these other 3 things. And the most wonderful and weird thing happened when we were doing this. As we tell someone what we're thankful for, especially if you do that repeatedly, then I found myself actually planning my Thanksgiving. Found myself actually planning the way that I was going to express my gratitude to God. Thinking in advance, the next time that I send Dylan one of these video messages, I got to have something to say. And so I was more intentional about it. And it helped me to see what God was doing in my life. So I want to encourage you not just to slow down and not just to maybe write some things down, but also consider telling people about it. When we talk about the ways that God is at work in our lives, it helps us to pay more attention to the way that God is at work in our lives. So consider, who is it that you could tell? I want you to think about that right now. If you were to do this, if you were to start talking with people every few days and say, this is the person that I want to bring my list of stuff that I'm thankful for to, who might that person be? And I think it'd be a pretty cool thing to try here. Another way that we can actually help to see the way that God is at work in our life, keeping in mind that the reason we're doing this is that person who was healed from leprosy, it started with he saw that he was healed, and I'm suggesting we can follow after his example. Another way that we can see the way that God is at work in our lives is to serve. And even yet this morning, when Dave Spatafor, I said his last name, was that a secret? When Dave shared the announcements this morning, part of what he mentioned was there are opportunities for us to be involved. There are opportunities for us to serve, and there's a whole variety of ways that we could do this. We've got individual ways to serve. We have teams that you can be a part of. And I'm not only talking about in the church, okay? I do believe that we should serve in the church, but our service extends beyond the walls of this building. It extends beyond the congregation. The way that we serve should include our neighbors and our coworkers and our families and the world at large and our community here. When we serve others, this weird thing happens, weird and wonderful thing happens. It makes us more aware of the way that others, including God, serve us. So if I am serving in a way that helps someone else, I can't help but think about the ways that other people serve me, the way that God serves me. It helps me to see the way that God is at work in my life, simply by serving others. So if you're not yet doing that, I strongly encourage and even challenge you, find a way to serve in the church, find a way to serve in the community, and it's going to help you see what God's doing in your life. Another thing that I think is important for us to do, one of the ways that can help us to follow the example of that Samaritan is we can give. When we give financially, when we give sacrificially, when we give generously, what happens is we start to see the things that we have that we're thankful for, especially if you're giving in a way that's kind of costly. I got a little bit of leftover, okay, I'll give that away. That didn't cost me anything. That might not really help me so very much. It might help a little bit to somebody else if I just give my leftover. But when I give generously, when you or I give in a way that actually shows generosity and sacrifice to others, what ends up happening is our generosity makes us more aware of the blessing of God in our lives. There's this connection between the way that we see God and the way that we give. As odd as that may seem, if you see God as worth more than the world, then you're ready to give him the world. If you want God to mean more in your life, then we should give more. Because when we do this, that connection between the way we give and how we see God can't be broken. You will see God at work if you start giving to others. There are a lot of things that we do together as a church. And you think about the basics like, well, we have a building, we have utilities, we pay staff. But there are other things as well that actually require us in order to make a financial investment. And as a result of those financial investments, you and I are blessed by those things. So as a congregation, when you give, you're actually enabling the church to participate in ministry. You're enabling the church to continue on to serve the people in the congregation and to serve the people in the community as well. And as we do that, as we give generously, then we see what God is doing in us. If you want to see God at work in your life, then I want to encourage and challenge you to give. So in this text here in Luke 17, I've kind of focused in on a little bit on that phrase there in verse 15 when he saw that he was healed, that man who had leprosy, he saw that he was healed. There's a next step there, so look with me again at verse 15. It reads, one of them when he saw that he was healed, what did he do? What are the next two words? He came back. You see that there? So he saw that he was healed, and then he came back. Think about your life, not just right now, but sort of like over time. There was a time in your life when you felt closest to God. There was a time in your life when you felt the closest to his church, the closest to his word, the closest to the center of his will for you and for me, when we felt that we were closest to him. But for whatever reason, we didn't stay there. We drifted away, and his word became less of a priority in our lives. The way that we spend face-to-face time with the body of Christ. This is the way God describes the church, our face-to-face time. I was like, well, instead of being committed to coming every weekend and getting together with the rest of the church, then what happens is, I'll come as long as I don't have something else that I need to do or something that would really be more interesting. And then we find ourselves praying, but not really praying like what we used to, praying several times a day when we felt closest to God. But now I'm just sort of praying about, thanks for my food and thanks for my vacation. Help me for my... We should say thanks for our food, right? These are fine prayers. But if that's the only thing that we're praying, then we're not closest to God. We're not closest to God if we don't end up giving generously, if we find ourselves in moral compromise in our lives, where we used to be close to Him and the morality of our lives lined up with Jesus Christ, but now we look at things and we're like, well, I'm not lining up with Him really quite as well as I did when I was closer to Him. Our relationships look different. They lack integrity and compassion. Our entertainment looks different. What we would have considered, oh no, I'm not going to put that before my eyes, then we find ourselves, well, yeah, we can watch that and maybe fast forward this part or watch that and maybe not fast forward this part. And our entertainment starts to look a little bit different then. I want to encourage you, the same way that I need encouragement, to follow the example of that man who was healed from leprosy. Come back. Come back. When you think about your life and when you think about the time when you felt closest to God, if that isn't right now, that when you think, when was I closest to God, if it isn't right now, if it was some other time in the past, then the very simple next step would be, come on back. Come on back closer to God. Come back closer to His sons and His daughters, the church. Come back to making sure that His word is a part of your daily life so that you are reading and thinking and memorizing and acting upon what He has to say, so that He becomes the one who is the king over Monday and Thursday and Tuesday and every day. Come back to Him, just like that person who had leprosy did. He was with Jesus, he got healed, he went to the priest, because that's what you were supposed to do if you got healed, and then he came back. And I think that's an encouragement for you and for me. Verse 15 reads, one of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back. What are the next two words? Praising God. Okay? Probably not all that surprising that we would include praising God when we're talking about how is it that we can demonstrate our thanks? How is it that we can express gratitude to God here? Praising God is really not all that surprising to us. I really think it kind of comes down to credit. Has anybody ever stolen credit for something that you did? You worked on it, you created it, you invested into it, but then somebody else said, oh yeah, I'm the one who did that. Have you been in that position before? It stinks. I think we need to give credit where credit is due. This man who was healed gave credit to God. He was praising God. So if you get a promotion at work, then yes, go ahead. Thank your boss. Thank your employer for trusting you enough to give you these new responsibilities and these new opportunities and maybe that pay raise. Hey, go ahead and thank your employer and thank God for being your provider, for enabling you to be able to work. If our lungs didn't breathe air, if our heart didn't pump blood, none of us would be going to work tomorrow. We couldn't do it. So in addition to saying, thanks, boss, I really think we should also say, thank you, God. Thank you for enabling me to be able to work. Mom makes a fantastic supper. Go ahead. You thank her and praise her for her culinary skills. Man, lunch coming wafting right through this door right here. I could smell it more than you guys can because I'm closer to it. Think about the people who are sitting down in the cafe in the fellowship hall right now. It's like torture for them because they might actually be eating the food right now. Could somebody go check? No, they wouldn't do that. But when you smell the wonderful food and you taste it and mom makes a fantastic meal, thank her. Thank her for that. And also, thank God for providing the way for you and I, for your family, to have that provision in your lives. When you get a diagnosis from your doctor or you figure out what treatment that you need, when some friend does a favor for you that you didn't even ask for, when your son or your daughter takes responsibility, and you didn't have to prompt them to do it, they just step up and they take responsibility, then yeah, say thank you to those people. And let's make sure that we're also giving God credit, because we know every good and perfect gift comes from above. Look at the words of James 1:17. Every good and perfect gift comes from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights. If there is something good in your life or in the life of your loved one, anything good, whether it is a thing or an opportunity, a situation, a circumstance, a relationship, whatever that is, if it's good, it came from God. Now, there are other people involved a lot of the times too. Mom's the one who mashed the potatoes, okay? But God is the giver of good gifts here. And I want to make sure that I'm giving credit where credit is due. So the same way that we can do this in our own lives, I actually think it's kind of fun to point this out in other people's lives too. And I don't mean nag or tell them that they're doing it wrong. I mean when you're talking with your coworker or you're talking with your neighbor and you find out that there's something happening in your coworker's life, there's something happening with your neighbor that was good, and they're saying this good thing, then the way that you can respond to that person is you can say something as simple as, well, thank God for that. It doesn't have to be all filled with jargon and long and weird, but just to direct the attention right to God. You got something good happening in your life? Thank God for that. I thank God for that. And that's just a really simple way for me to remind myself and then also to remind that other person. Parents do it too, right? What do parents say to their kids? What do we say? Thank you. And don't talk that way to your friends or your neighbors, but it is good for us to encourage other people to thank God so that they can be praising him just like we can be praising him too. We want to point their attention to him. There's a fourth part right here, okay? The same way that man who was healed from leprosy, he saw God at work in his life, and he came back to the Lord, and he praised God. We need to do it the same way that he did that. So look again at verse 15, Luke 17:15. He describes how we can do that. Luke 17:15 reads, one of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God. How did he do it? See it? How did he do it? In a loud voice. That's a whole lot different than me standing there with my hands in my pockets or my arms crossed or still. That's not the way that he was praising and thanking God. He was doing it loud, which means other people noticed. He was doing it loud, even if it might have been a little bit, is he being rude? Is it, what's going on here? Why is this guy making so much noise? He did it in a loud way. Compared to the priority and the frequency and the emphasis that you and I have for other things that we talk about in our lives, how loud is our praise? We talk about all kinds of stuff, right? I don't mean literal volume, but we talk about all kinds of things. We talk about sports. We talk about politics. We talk about our kids and our grandkids. We share jokes with each other, and we offer things for sale. We vent our frustrations. We post on social media, and none of those things are necessarily bad, maybe the politics part, but none of those things are necessarily bad. But when we compare those things that we're saying to the volume, the veracity of our praise to God, I'm wondering if our praise to God kind of gets a little bit drowned out, because I spent a whole lot of time talking about this and that and this movie and this thing and this place I went, and that it's not bad to talk about other stuff, but the way that he expressed his praise was in a loud voice. I want you to see a video that as a reading of the Psalm 145. Listen to the emphasis in Psalm 145 and think about the way that praise is expressed, not only said, but it's said in a loud voice. Watch this video with me.
I will exalt you, my God the King. I will praise your name forever and ever. Every day I will praise you and extol your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom. One generation commends your works to another. They tell of your mighty acts. They speak of the glorious splendor of your majesty, and I will meditate on your wonderful works. They tell of the power of your awesome works, and I will proclaim your great deeds. They celebrate your abundant goodness and joyfully sing of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and rich in love. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. All your works praise you, Lord. Your faithful people extol you. They tell of the glory of your kingdom and speak of your might, so that all people may know of your mighty acts and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures through all generations. The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. The Lord upholds all who fall and lifts up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and faithful in all he does. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. He hears their cry and saves them. The Lord watches over all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy. My mouth will speak in praise of the Lord. Let every creature praise his holy name forever and ever.
Thank you, Sherry, for reading that for us. I love the way that you increased in your passion as you went further through that psalm, because I think that was exactly how it was meant to be written and read. Not only am I praising my God, but I'm praising him with increasing strength, with increasing emphasis. And like that man who was healed from leprosy, praising him in a loud voice. So thank you for doing that. And thank God for his word as well. The way that Psalm 145 can be an example to you and I to put words into our mouths. Or how exactly is it that I'm going to express my gratitude to him? There's a lot of things in that chapter, Psalm 145, that you and I can be thankful for as well. So back to Luke 17, still looking at this text here. In verse 15, it reads, one of them, when he saw that he was healed, he came back, praising God in a loud voice. And in verse 16, it says, he threw himself at Jesus' feet. So can you sort of like picture this in your mind here? Flopping down on the ground is not something that's generally a normal practice in our culture or in middle age. Oh, my back. I don't want to get down on the ground for pretty much any reason whatsoever. But it's not really about the ground. It's not really about the posture of his body either. When we read here about how he threw himself at Jesus' feet, what we're really seeing is the attitude of his heart. And that's something that you and I could have regardless of what our back feels like, okay? The attitude of our heart then. Psalm 13:15 reads, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. Hebrews 13:15. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise. If it's a sacrifice, then it means that it costs me something. See what I'm saying? A sacrifice of praise is going to cost me something. If it doesn't cost me something, then it's not a sacrifice. If our praise doesn't cost us something, then we're not done praising yet. There's more honor to be given. There's more credit to direct to God. There's more praise that he deserves. We talked a little bit about volume. We talked a little bit about veracity. And when I think about the sacrifice of praise here, it makes me ask, have I? I think we should each ask, have I thrown myself at the feet of Jesus? And remember, I'm not talking about physical posture. I mean, is the attitude of my heart such that when I recognize that Jesus is king, is he king over me? He's king of the universe, but is he king over me? And when I throw myself at his feet, what that means is he's my king. He's king of my decisions. He's king of my bank account. He's king of my free time. He's king of my commitments. He should be, right? This is what I'm saying, that he should be for each of us. That's what it looks like when we throw ourselves at the feet of Jesus. It has a lot more to do with him than it does with us. When we see this guy who was healed from leprosy throwing himself at the feet of Jesus, that says a whole lot more about Jesus than what it says about that man. When you or I throw ourselves at Jesus' feet by recognizing his rule over our lives, that says way more about him, that he is the one who is rightfully in charge. That kind of sacrifice to let him be the boss over my decisions, the boss over my money, my free time, the boss over my relationships, that kind of commitment for us to throw ourselves at his feet in that way it's probably going to cost us something. But I can guarantee you, whatever it costs you is worth it. When you decide that you're going to throw your life at the feet of Jesus, in totality, it will cost you, but it will be worth the cost. Luke 17:15 reads, one of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet, and then what's that next part right there? He thanked him. Now, it's not super surprising that we get here, especially in November, right? Because I'm kind of trying to encourage us to direct our heart's attention to expressing thanks to God. That it's a very natural next step for us. When we see God at work in our lives, when we come back so that we can be as close to him as we ever have been, when we praise God and when we do it in a loud voice, and when we humble ourselves and say, you're in charge, Lord, and I throw myself at your feet and submit to your rule, when we do this, then very naturally our next step would be to thank him. The sad truth is, most people don't. Most people don't do this. How many people got healed that day? 10. How many people came back to say thanks? 1. Just 1. Most people don't do this part. It is the natural next step, but a lot of people don't do it. And for the one who did, Jesus responded, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. If you want to be well in the eyes of God, if you want to have that closeness with God, if you want to live in the joy that comes from expressing gratitude to God in these ways, if you want that in your life, then we have the steps forward to move in that direction. See God at work in your life. Pay attention to what he's doing. Come back so that you can be close with him. The way that maybe you remember at some point in your life that you were, come back so that you can be close to him again. Praise him and do it in a loud voice. Throw yourself at his feet in total submission to his rule over you and thank him. Let's stand and sing together.